He thought he was merely finalizing a piece of paper cutting ties with the human wife he believed had callously abandoned him. But when the grand oak doors of the Ashford estate swung open, the ruthless vampire king froze. There she stood, Penelope, unapologetically plus size, radiating a fierce defiance, and undeniably 8 months pregnant with a child that should be biologically impossible. What was supposed to be a simple divorce just became a desperate hostage situation. "You won't believe how this ends." The rain in Boston was unforgiving, slashing against the tinted windows of the town car like icy claws. In the back seat, Penelope Hayes sat in heavy silence. She placed a hand on the massive swell of her stomach, feeling the restless, frantic kicks of the life growing inside her. She breathed through the ache in her lower back, a constant companion these days. Penelope was a woman who took up space, and she had long ago stopped apologizing for it. Even before the pregnancy, her body was a landscape of lush, abundant curves, a stark, warm contrast to the sharp, cold, angular world of the vampires she had married into. She was soft where they were, stone warm where they were ice. And for 3 years, Dominic Ashford, the sovereign of the eastern seaboard vampires, had worshipped every inch of her plus-size frame. He had called her his grounding force, his heartbeat in a breathless world. "Until 8 months ago. Penny, are you sure about this?" Sylvia asked, her voice cutting through the hum of the tires. Sylvia was Penelope's human lawyer and fiercely loyal best friend. She clutched a leather briefcase to her chest, as if it were a shield. Inside that briefcase lay the divorce papers, already bearing Penelope's signature in crisp black ink. "I've never been more sure of anything, Sylvia," Penelope replied, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric of her black maternity dress. "He made his choice. I'm just making mine official." The memory still tasted like ash in her mouth. 8 months ago, she had walked into Dominic's private study to share the impossible news. Human vampire pregnancies were myths, whispered rumors among the undead, yet the 3 positive tests in her bathroom had proven otherwise. She had been terrified, elated, and desperate to tell her husband, but when she opened the heavy oak door, she hadn't found the devoted king. She had found him entangled with Natasha Ivanova, his ruthless, centuries-old lieutenant. Natasha's fangs had been buried in Dominic's neck, their bodies pressed together in an ancient, intimate blood-sharing ritual that Dominic had sworn to Penelope he had entirely given up. Penelope hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown a tantrum. She had simply packed a single bag and vanished into the human world, protected by enchantments Sylvia had purchased from rogue witches on the black market. Now the town car slowed to a halt before the towering wrought-iron gates of the Ashford estate. The gargoyles perched on the stone pillars seemed to sneer down at them. "Open the gates," Sylvia told the driver, rolling down the window to flash a heavily stamped legal document at the vampire guard stationed in the rain. The guard, a hulking man named Sebastian, took one look at the paper, then peered into the back seat. His glowing crimson eyes widened imperceptibly when they landed on Penelope. He didn't speak. He simply stepped back and hit the mechanism. The gates groaned open. "They didn't expect you to come in person," Sylvia murmured as the car crawled up the winding tree-lined driveway. "Dominic's lawyers assumed we'd just mail the final execution copy. If I mailed it, he would drag this out for another year, just to be spiteful," Penelope said, her jaw setting into a stubborn line. "I need him to see me. I need him to look me in the eye when he signs away his rights to me, and then I am disappearing for good." The car stopped in front of the sweeping marble steps of the manor. Penelope pushed the door open before the driver could assist her. Stepping out into the cold drizzle, she felt the sheer, terrifying weight of her reality. She was 28, heavily pregnant, and about to walk into a den of apex predators. Her ankles were swollen, her breath was shallow, but as she looked up at the Gothic spires of the home she once loved, her spirit hardened into impenetrable steel. "Let's get this over with," Penelope said, gripping the railing and hauling her beautiful, heavy, exhausted body up the steps. Every step was a final severing of the past. Inside the grand hall, the air was suffocatingly opulent. The scent of aged mahogany, burning beeswax candles, and the metallic tang of hidden blood reserves filled the cavernous space. At the far end of the room, sitting atop a modernized throne of black leather and brushed steel, sat Dominic Ashford. He looked exactly as Penelope remembered, and yet entirely different. His aristocratic face, usually carved with a terrifying composed grace, was drawn and shadowed. His obsidian eyes, which used to soften only for her, were blank and merciless. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, tapping a solid gold fountain pen rhythmically against the armrest of his chair. Beside him stood Natasha, clad in a sleek, blood blood-red dress that clung to her emaciated, model-thin frame. She was whispering something into Dominic's ear, a smug, venomous smile playing on her lips. "Just sign it, Dominic," Natasha purred, her voice carrying across the silent hall. The human realized she was out of her depth. She was too fragile, too soft for our world. Let her fade back into mediocrity. Dominic didn't respond. He stared at the double doors at the end of the hall. He had spent 8 months tearing the eastern seaboard apart, looking for Penelope. He had tortured informants, burned down safe houses, and nearly started a war with the werewolf packs, all to find his missing wife. But she had vanished like smoke, and then a week ago her lawyer had reached out with a single demand, a finalized divorce. Or the witches protecting her would leak Ashford's financial vulnerabilities to the Vampire Council. He had agreed to the meeting, planning to use the opportunity to capture her lawyer and force Penelope out of hiding. He expected a weak, tearful human to walk through those doors. He expected groveling. He was not prepared for reality. The heavy oak doors were pushed open by 2 guards. The hinges let out a low, mournful groan. First, the scent hit him. Dominic's tapping pen stopped mid-air. His nostrils flared. Beneath the damp smell of rain and the sharp scent of human anxiety, there was something else. A fragrance so intoxicating, so overwhelmingly powerful, it made the fangs of every vampire in the room instantly descend. It was the scent of life. Pure, concentrated, miraculous life. Apple cinnamon and a rich metallic undertone that smelled undeniably like his own blood. Then he heard it. Thump, 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 thump. A heartbeat, but not Penelope's steady, familiar rhythm. This was a second heartbeat. Fast, frantic, tiny. Dominic stood up so fast his chair screeched against the marble floor. Penelope walked into the hall. She wore a fitted black maternity dress that draped elegantly over her lush, full figure. The dark fabric hugged the massive, unmistakable curve of an 8-month pregnancy. Her thick, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, damp from the rain, and her dark eyes were locked dead onto his. She looked magnificent. She looked like a fertility goddess stepping into a graveyard. Her sheer size and presence commanded the massive room, making the slender, predatory vampires around her look frail by comparison. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered vampire court. Whispers erupted like striking matches. Impossible? A child? The king's heir. Dominic felt his undead heart, dormant for 3 centuries, give a violent phantom stutter. The gold pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the polished marble, sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Penelope! Dominic breathed the name tearing out of his throat like barbed wire. His gaze was anchored to her belly. He took a step forward, his mind short-circuiting. The math instantly clicked in his ancient brain. 8 months gone. She was 8 months pregnant. Stay where you are. Penelope's voice rang out, clear, authoritative, and utterly devoid of the warmth he used to crave. Natasha, recovering from her initial shock, sneered. What is the meaning of this trickery? What mortal parasite are you carrying, human? You dare bring your illegitimate filth into the king's hall? Before Natasha could blink, Dominic's hand shot out. He didn't even look at her. He just grabbed Natasha by the throat and violently hurled her across the room. She crashed into a marble pillar with a sickening crunch, sliding to the floor in a heap of red fabric and broken bones. Speak to my wife like that again, Dominic snarled, his voice vibrating with a demonic, terrifying bass, and I will tear your head from your shoulders. Penelope didn't flinch at the violence. She merely arched an eyebrow, standing her ground as Sylvia nervously unlatched her briefcase beside her. I am no longer your wife, Dominic, Penelope said coldly. At least I won't be in about 5 minutes. Mr. Ashford, Sylvia interjected, her voice shaking, but professional, as she pulled the thick stack of legal documents from her briefcase. As agreed, we are here to finalize the dissolution of the marriage between yourself and Ms. Hayes. All assets have been declined by my client. She wants nothing from your estate. We simply need your signature on page 42. Dominic didn't even look at the lawyer. In a blur of motion, he crossed the 50 feet between the throne and Penelope, stopping barely a foot away from her. Sylvia squeaked and took a step back, but Penelope held her ground. She tilted her chin up, refusing to be intimidated by his towering height or the predatory glow in his eyes. Up close, she could see the faint tremor in his jaw. A baby, Dominic whispered, raising a trembling hand toward her stomach. He was terrified to touch her, terrified this was an illusion concocted by a witch. You're carrying my child. Penelope immediately immediately slapped his hand away. The resounding smack made the guards in the room tense, ready to execute her for striking the king, but Dominic raised a single finger, silently commanding them to stand down. "I am carrying my child," Penelope corrected, her voice dripping with ice. "A child you will never know." "Why?" he demanded, his voice cracking, shedding centuries of royal composure. "Why did you run? Why didn't you tell me? A vampire birth is a miracle, Penelope. We are practically sterile. You are carrying the sole heir to the Ashford bloodline, and you hid them from me. Because you were busy swallowing your lieutenant's blood?" Penelope snapped, the anger she had suppressed for 8 long months finally erupting. Her chest heaved, her full curves rising and falling with her fury. "I came to your study to tell you. I was terrified, Dominic. I didn't know what it meant for a human to carry a vampire's baby. I came to my husband for protection, and instead I found you deep in an ancient bonding ritual with Natasha." Dominic looked as though he had been physically struck. "What? Don't play dumb. I saw you. I saw her fangs in your neck. I saw the bond," Penelope said, tears of frustration pricking her eyes, though she furiously blinked them away. "I realized right then that this court, this world, it's too toxic. You're too toxic. I will not raise my son in a house where his father is bound to a bloodthirsty sociopath who would likely poison my baby just to secure her own power." Dominic's eyes widened, a horrific realization dawning on him. "Penelope, 8 months ago, the night of the winter solstice?" "Yes," she spat. "I was poisoned," Dominic said, his voice dropping to an urgent, desperate whisper. "The werewolf delegate slipped wolfsbane into the blood wine. It's lethal to us. Natasha didn't bite me for pleasure, Penelope. She was siphoning the poisoned blood out of my veins to keep my heart from stopping while Victor fetched the antidote. I was unconscious. I nearly died that night." Penelope froze, the breath hitched in her throat. She stared into his dark eyes, searching for the lie, but found only raw, agonizing truth. You were dying," she whispered, her hands instinctively moving to cradle her heavy stomach. "I woke up 3 days later and you were gone," Dominic said, taking a step closer, crowding into her space. He was close enough now that his body heat radiated against her damp clothes. "I tore the world apart looking for you. I thought the wolves took you. I thought you were dead. If I had known—" He looked down at her belly again, a look of profound, devastating awe crossing his features. "If I had known you were carrying my miracle, I would have burned this entire city to the ground to keep you safe." Sylvia, clearing her throat nervously, held out the pen. "Be that as it may, Mr. Ashford, the papers." Dominic slowly turned his head to look at the lawyer, then down at the thick stack of divorce papers in her hands. With a terrifying calm, Dominic took the papers. "Dominic, sign them," Penelope warned, her voice trembling, now the absolute certainty of her anger suddenly fractured by his revelation. "I am not staying here, even if it was poison. I am human. I am fat mortal and completely out of place in your kingdom. Your court hates me. They see me as a weakness. I won't let them look at my son the same way." Dominic didn't answer. He gripped the top of the legal packet, and with a swift, violent motion ripped the 50 pages in half. Then in half again, he let the shredded pieces of the divorce decree flutter to the marble floor like snow. "What are you doing?" Penelope shouted, stepping back. "Guards!" Dominic commanded, his voice booming through the hall, restoring the terrifying authority of the Vampire King. "Seal the estate. Lock down the perimeter. No one leaves. No one enters." The heavy oak doors slammed shut with a deafening boom, and the intricate magical deadbolt slid into place with a series of heavy clicks. Dominic turned back to Penelope, his eyes flashing with a possessive, brilliant crimson. "You are my wife. You are the queen of this court. You are the mother of my heir. You are the most beautiful, vital creature I have ever laid eyes upon, and I will be damned to the lowest pits of hell before I ever let you walk out of my sight again." Penelope clutched her stomach, her heart hammering against her ribs. As the reality of the situation locked in around her, the divorce was ruined, and the Vampire King had just taken her hostage. Penelope's heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs, as the echoing boom of the heavy oak doors, sealing shut, reverberated through the cavernous hall. The intricate, ancient, magical deadbolts slid into their locking mechanisms, with a series of sharp, heavy clicks that sounded entirely too much like the ceiling of a tomb. She was trapped. The divorce decree lay in literal tatters on the polished marble floor, and the man she had spent 8 agonizing months running from was now staring at her with a predatory, possessive hunger that made her blood run cold. You cannot do this, Dominic, Penelope stated, her voice shaking despite her desperate attempts to keep it steady. She placed both hands protectively over the massive swell of her 8-month pregnancy, her maternal instincts flaring into high alert. This is kidnapping. This is false imprisonment. You are a king, not a dictator. You cannot just lock me inside the Ashford estate because you tore up a legal document. Dominic Ashford, the terrifyingly powerful sovereign of the eastern seaboard vampires, did not look remorseful. In fact, as he gazed upon her lush, plus-size figure, his obsidian eyes softened into a look of overwhelming devotion that completely contradicted the violent lockdown he had just initiated. He stepped closer, his expensive charcoal suit shifting flawlessly over his broad, immortal shoulders. "I can, and I have," Dominic murmured, his deep, resonant voice vibrating through the tense air of the hall. "You are my wife, Penelope. You are the queen of this domain, and you are carrying the most impossible, miraculous gift this world has ever seen. Do you honestly believe I would let you walk out of those doors and back into the vulnerable human world? You are staying here where I can protect you, where I can protect our son." Sylvia, Penelope's fiercely loyal human lawyer, finally found her voice. She adjusted her glasses, her hands visibly trembling as she gripped the handle of her now empty leather briefcase. "Mr. Ashford, my client has rights. If you do not allow us to leave this premises immediately, I have a dead man's switch set up with my associates at the firm. They will contact the authorities. They will contact the Vampire Council. You will have a federal and supernatural crisis on your hands." Dominic finally tore his gaze away from Penelope's magnificent rounded belly to look at the terrified lawyer. "Miss Sylvia, is it? I admire your dedication to my wife. I truly do. Which is why I am not going to throw you in the dungeons. However, you will be staying with us as well. A guest suite has already been prepared for you in the East Wing. You will have access to our Wi-Fi, and you may contact your firm to tell them the negotiations are ongoing, but you are not leaving. No one is." Before Sylvia could protest, 2 towering vampire guards materialized from the shadows, their crimson eyes glowing with silent menace. They gently but firmly grasped Sylvia's arms and began to escort her out of the main hall. "Penelope," Sylvia cried out, looking back over her shoulder. "Sylvia, leave her alone, Dominic," Penelope shouted, taking a heavy step forward, but the sheer weight of her pregnancy and the swelling in her ankles made her stumble. Instantly, Dominic was there. His reflexes were a blur of motion, his strong, cold arms wrapping around her waist and shoulders to catch her before she could even register the fall. The sudden, intense contact sent a jolt of electricity through Penelope's system. It had been 8 months since she had felt his touch. She had convinced herself that she loathed him, that the memory of him was a poison in her veins. But as his chest pressed against her back, she felt a treacherous wave of relief. He smelled of rain bergamot and ancient unyielding power. "I have you," Dominic whispered into her hair, his breath cool against her scalp. He slowly helped her right herself, but he did not let go. Instead, his large, pale hand moved tentatively, almost reverently, to rest over her hands, which were still clutching her stomach. As soon as his palm made contact with the taut fabric of her black maternity dress, the baby kicked. It was a hard, sharp jab directly against Dominic's hand. The Vampire King gasped. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and wonder. He dropped to his knees right there on the cold marble floor, completely ignoring the stunned whispers of his remaining court members. He pressed his face against the side of her stomach, closing his eyes as he listened to the frantic, rapid heartbeat of his unborn child. "He is so strong," Dominic breathed, his voice cracking with emotion. "My blood, my air, Penelope, how have you managed this alone? The sheer toll this must be taking on your mortal body." "I managed because I had to," Penelope said fiercely, though she didn't push him away. She looked down at the top of his dark head, her heart warring with her mind. He had been poisoned. He hadn't betrayed her. The realization was still crashing over her in suffocating waves. "I had Dr. Harrison Montgomery monitoring me. He's the head of maternal fetal medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. We used a false name. And he thinks the baby's unique blood markers are just a rare genetic mutation. I've been taking iron supplements, eating constantly to keep up with the baby's caloric demands. I survived, Dominic. Dominic stood up slowly, his eyes dark with a mixture of guilt and overwhelming possessiveness. He took in her full figure, the beautiful, abundant curves that he had always worshipped, now amplified by the life she was growing. The world of vampires was obsessed with starvation, with lean, predatory perfection. But to Dominic, Penelope was the embodiment of everything good and vital in the world. Her softness was his sanctuary. Her size was a testament to her strength. Her ability to nurture and sustain life in a way his dead kind never could. "Dr. Montgomery will be brought here," Dominic commanded, turning to his head of security, a massive vampire named Wyatt. "Send a retrieval team to New York. Bring the doctor his entire staff if necessary, and every piece of medical equipment he requires. Set up a state-of-the-art maternity ward in the West Wing. Spare no expense." "Dominic, you can't just kidnap the head of Mount Sinai," Penelope argued, her eyes widening in disbelief. "He has a life. He has other patients. "I will buy the entire hospital and double his salary," Dominic replied dismissively, his focus entirely on Penelope. "Money is entirely irrelevant, my love. The only thing that matters is you and the safe delivery of our son. You look exhausted. Your heart rate is elevated. You need to rest." Without asking for permission, Dominic scooped Penelope up into his arms. Despite her heavy, pregnant weight, he lifted her as effortlessly as if she were made of feathers. Penelope gasped instinctively, wrapping her arms around his broad neck to steady herself. "Put me down," she demanded, her cheeks flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. "I am perfectly capable of walking, Dominic. I am fat and pregnant, not an invalid. You are carrying the future of the Ashford bloodline, and you are carrying my heart," Dominic corrected softly, his gaze locked onto hers as he carried her toward the grand, sweeping staircase. "I will never let you walk on cold stone again, if I can help it. You are going to the master suite. You are going to rest in a bed draped in silk, and you are going to eat whatever your heart desires. And I am going to spend the rest of eternity making up for the pain I caused you." As Dominic carried her up the stairs, leaving the stunned court behind, Penelope caught a glimpse of Natasha. The ruthless lieutenant was still crumpled against the marble pillar where Dominic had thrown her, clutching her shattered shoulder. Her red dress was torn, her perfect pale face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Natasha's crimson eyes locked onto Penelope's stomach, and in that fleeting second, Penelope saw a promise of absolute death. The gilded cage had closed around her, but the monsters were locked inside with her. The master suite of the Ashford estate was a sprawling testament to immortal wealth. The walls were lined with original Renaissance tapestries, the floors covered in plush, imported Persian rugs that absorbed every sound. At the center of the room sat a massive, custom-built, four-poster bed draped in heavy velvet curtains. A fire roared in the massive stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the opulent space. Penelope sat on the edge of the mattress, her bare feet sinking into the soft rug. She had been here for 3 days of luxurious, terrifying captivity. True to his word, Dominic had transformed the estate to accommodate her. The kitchens, which usually sat dormant, were now fully staffed with world-class human chefs flown in from Paris and Rome, tasked with satisfying Penelope's intense pregnancy cravings. She had dined on truffle risotto, massive slices of decadent chocolate cake, and fresh fruit imported daily from tropical climates. Her wardrobe had been replaced with exquisite, custom-tailored maternity wear that accommodated her generous curves without making her feel like she was wearing a tent, and Dominic had barely left her side. He treated her like a porcelain deity. He spent hours simply kneeling beside the bed, his head resting against her stomach, listening to the baby. He massaged her swollen ankles with expensive lotions. He brushed her thick dark hair, and he whispered ancient vampire vows of protection into the quiet night. He had explained in agonizing detail the events of the winter solstice. He provided sworn testimonies from his guards' medical records detailing the wolfsbane poisoning, and even brought Victor, his second-in-command, to corroborate the story. Penelope's anger, the fiery shield she had carried for 8 months, was slowly crumbling under the weight of the truth and his relentless devotion. She still loved him. God help her, she still loved this terrifying, immortal creature. But the fear remained. She was a human, a soft, plus-size, vulnerable human living in a fortress of apex predators. And then there was Natasha. Penelope had not seen the treacherous lieutenant since the day in the Great Hall, but she could feel her presence like a shadow creeping under the door. Dominic had stripped Natasha of her rank and confined her to her quarters, pending a formal tribunal for disrespecting the Queen. But in the vampire world, power was not easily contained by locked doors. It was late afternoon, and the rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite. Dominic had been called away to the secure communications room to deal with a border dispute with a rival coven in Philadelphia. He had promised to be gone no longer than an hour, leaving 2 of his most trusted guards stationed outside Penelope's door. Penelope sighed, rubbing a soothing hand over her stomach. "Just you and me, right now, little guy," she whispered, feeling a gentle roll beneath her palm. "What are we going to do?" Suddenly, the heavy mahogany door of the suite clicked open. Penelope tensed, expecting one of the guards, or a maid bringing her afternoon tea. Instead, the air in the room grew instantly freezingly cold. The roaring fire in the hearth flickered, the flames turning a sickly shade of blue before dying down to mere embers. Natasha stepped into the room. She moved with the silent, predatory grace of a starving wolf. Her arm was in a black silk sling, a testament to the damage Dominic had inflicted, but her eyes were bright with a manic, venomous triumph. She wore a sleek black jumpsuit that highlighted her unnatural skeletal thinness, a stark contrast to Penelope's abundant, life-filled figure. "Hello, human," Natasha purred, closing the door behind her and sliding the intricate deadbolt into place. Penelope's heart slammed into her throat. She instinctively scooted back on the bed, pulling a thick quilt over her lap. "How did you get past the guards? Dominic ordered you confined to your quarters." Natasha offered a chilling, bloodless smile. "Dominic's guards are loyal to the crown, but some of them are loyal to the old ways. They remember a time before our glorious king lost his mind and soiled his bloodline by mating with a mortal cow." She stepped further into the room, her crimson eyes locked onto Penelope's stomach. "They looked the other way. They know what needs to be done to save the Ashford legacy from this abomination. "If you touch me, Dominic will kill you," Penelope said, her voice shaking violently. She reached under the pillows, her fingers scrambling desperately for the silver-plated dagger Dominic had hidden there for emergencies. "He will tear you to pieces, Natasha. He nearly did it in the hall." "Oh, I am fully aware of the risks," Natasha replied smoothly, pulling a slender, wicked-looking syringe from her pocket. The fluid inside the vial glowed with a toxic, sickly green luminescence. "But it will be worth it. This is highly concentrated dead blood, a synthetic poison designed specifically to target fetal tissue. It won't kill you, human. It will just induce a very sudden, very tragic miscarriage. Dominic will be heartbroken, of course. He will mourn, but vampires forget. He will heal and he will return to his senses. He will return to me." Penelope's fingers finally closed around the hilt of the silver dagger. Her maternal instincts, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror, flooded her system with adrenaline. She was heavy, she was clumsy, and she was entirely outmatched by a vampire's speed, but she was a mother defending her child. "Get out!" Penelope snarled, pulling the dagger from beneath the pillows and holding it out in front of her. The silver blade glinted in the dim light of the room. "I will stab you in the heart, Natasha. I swear to God I will." Natasha laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on Penelope's nerves. "You are pathetic. A fat, slow, pathetic mortal trying to wield a weapon she barely understands." In the blink of an eye, Natasha vanished from her spot near the door. Penelope gasped as a cold, vice-like grip clamped down on her wrist. Natasha materialized right beside the bed, her face inches from Penelope's. The vampire's speed was incomprehensible. With a vicious twist, Natasha wrenched Penelope's arm, forcing a cry of pain from her lips as the silver dagger clattered uselessly to the floor. "Hold still, little piggy," Natasha sneered, raising the glowing green syringe. "This will only pinch for a second, and then your little miracle will be nothing but a messy memory." Penelope fought back with everything she had. She threw her heavy weight against the vampire, kicking out with her legs and thrashing her body. She managed to land a solid strike with her knee against Natasha's broken shoulder. Natasha let out a feral shriek of pain, her grip faltering for a fraction of a second. Penelope used the opening to scramble off the opposite side of the bed, putting the massive piece of furniture between them. She knocked over a priceless Ming vase, the ceramic shattering loudly against the floor, hoping the noise would alert someone, anyone. "You miserable bitch!" Natasha screamed, her eyes flashing from crimson to pitch black. She leapt over the bed, landing gracefully on the rug in front of Penelope. She raised the syringe, lunging forward with lethal intent. Penelope threw her hands up over her stomach, squeezing her eyes shut, preparing for the piercing agony of the needle, but it never came. Instead, the massive mahogany doors of the suite were literally blown off their hinges. The wood splintered into 1,000 jagged pieces, exploding into the room like shrapnel. A roar that sounded less like a man and more like a primordial beast shook the very foundations of the estate. Dominic Ashford didn't just run into the room, he crashed into it like a thunderbolt. Before Natasha could even turn her head, Dominic's hand closed over her throat. He lifted her entirely off the ground, the force of his momentum carrying them both across the room until he slammed her into the solid stone wall of the fireplace. The sickening sound of Natasha's spine cracking echoed in the sudden silence. The green syringe flew from her hand, shattering harmlessly against the hearth. Dominic's face was unrecognizable. His fangs were fully descended, his skin pulled tight over his aristocratic bones, and his eyes were practically bleeding with absolute murderous fury. He held Natasha pinned against the wall, his grip tightening until her windpipe began to crush. "You touched my wife?" Dominic hissed, his voice a demonic vibration that made the glass in the windows tremble. "You threatened my child." Natasha clawed weakly at his hand, gasping for air, her arrogant facade completely shattered by the terrifying reality of the king's wrath. Penelope slid down the side of the bed, collapsing onto the floor. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, sobbing uncontrollably, her entire body shaking from the adrenaline crash. Hearing her sobs, Dominic's head snapped toward her. The murderous rage in his eyes flickered, warring with the desperate need to comfort his mate. He looked back at Natasha, his jaw set in a rigid line of absolute finality. "Your treason ends today," Dominic decreed. With a swift, brutal motion, he twisted his wrist. The sharp, decisive snap of Natasha's neck breaking was the last sound the treacherous lieutenant ever heard. Dominic dropped her lifeless body to the floor like a piece of discarded trash. He didn't spare her a second glance. Dominic was across the room in a heartbeat, dropping to his knees beside Penelope. He pulled her carefully into his arms, burying his face in her neck, his own immortal body trembling violently. "I have you," he repeated, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I am so sorry, my love. I am so sorry. It's over. She can never hurt you again." Penelope clung to his suit jacket, weeping into his chest. The threat was eliminated, but as she felt a sudden, sharp, agonizing cramp tear through her lower back, a new terror bloomed inside her. She gasped, her fingers digging into Dominic's arms. "Dominic," she whimpered, her face going pale. What is it, Penelope?" he asked, frantically pulling back to look at her. Another cramp hit her stronger this time, forcing a cry of pure agony from her lips. She looked down, and Dominic followed her gaze. A dark, wet stain was spreading across the fabric of her maternity dress. "The baby!" Penelope gasped, tears streaming down her face. "The baby is coming, now!" The panic in Dominic's immortal eyes was a terrifying, unprecedented sight. For over 3 centuries, the Vampire King had faced invading armies, werewolf rebellions, and rogue witch covens with an icy, unshakable composure. But as the dark, wet stain spread across the fabric of Penelope's black maternity dress, the ancient monarch looked entirely, utterly human in his helpless terror. "Wyatt," Dominic's voice tore from his throat, a sonic boom of authority and desperation that rattled the shattered remains of the mahogany doors. In less than a second, the massive head of security materialized in the ruined doorway, his glowing crimson eyes taking in the scene, the dead body of the treacherous Natasha, crumpled by the fireplace, and his king kneeling on the floor, clutching his heavily pregnant, bleeding mortal wife. "My king," Wyatt said, his voice dropping an octave in absolute deference. "The medical ward." Dominic barked, his hands moving with frantic, terrifying speed to assess Penelope's condition without causing her further pain. "Is the human doctor here? Did the retrieval team reach New York?" The helicopter breached the state line, 5 minutes ago, sire. They are landing on the south lawn as we speak. We have fully stocked the west wing with the blood transfusions, the incubators, and the surgical equipment he demanded, Wyatt reported crisply, though his eyes lingered on the sheer amount of blood pooling beneath Penelope. Shall I prepare a transport stretcher? There is no time, Dominic snarled. He slid his arms beneath Penelope's knees and behind her back, lifting her lush, heavy form as effortlessly as one might lift a silk sheet. Penelope let out a jagged, breathless scream as another contraction ripped through her abdomen. Her hands, pale and trembling, clamped down on the lapels of Dominic's ruined charcoal suit. Her knuckles were white, her breathing shallow and frantic. Dominic, it's too early, she gasped, tears cutting hot tracks down her pale cheeks. I'm only 34 weeks. His lungs, he's too small. The dead blood, did she poison him? She didn't touch you. She didn't pierce the skin. Dominic swore, his legs eating up the distance down the grand hallway at a speed that blurred the ancient tapestries on the walls. He was moving as fast as he dared without jarring her traumatized body. This is just stress, my love. It is the adrenaline. Our son is strong. He has the Ashford resilience, and he has your incredible, beautiful strength. You are both going to survive this. Do you hear me? I forbid you to leave me. Penelope squeezed her eyes shut, fighting against a wave of agonizing pain that felt like her very bones were being pulled apart. The baby was kicking wildly, his half-vampire strength turning her womb into a violent, hostile environment. The sheer force of his movements was unnatural, causing internal tearing that a purely human pregnancy would never inflict. They burst through the double doors of the West Wing, entering a space that had been magically and physically transformed overnight. The dark Gothic architecture of the Ashford estate had been completely overhauled. Brilliant, sterile white lights illuminated the corridor. Heart monitors, ventilators, and stainless steel surgical tables sat ready in a massive, climate-controlled suite. Sylvia was already there, pacing frantically. When she saw Dominic carrying Penelope, the lawyer dropped her phone and rushed forward. "Penny! Oh my God, what happened?" Sylvia cried out, her eyes wide with terror at the sight of the blood. "Natasha attacked her," Dominic stated coldly, laying Penelope down on the pristine white surgical bed in the center of the room. He refused to step back, keeping one hand firmly wrapped around Penelope's trembling fingers. "Natasha is dead, but the stress induced premature labor." "I told you this place was a death trap," Sylvia shouted, shedding her professional demeanor completely. She grabbed a sterile towel and began dabbing the cold sweat from Penelope's forehead. "Just breathe, Penny. Dr. Montgomery is literally sprinting up the lawn right now. Just hold on." Suddenly, the heavy doors to the ward banged open. Dr. Harrison Montgomery, a brilliant, frantic-looking man in his late 50s, stumbled into the room. His tie was askew, his white coat billowed behind him, and he was flanked by two massive vampire guards who looked ready to snap his neck if he made a wrong move. Harrison was a man of science, a man who had spent 30 years relying on logic, anatomy, and proven medical facts. Being dragged onto a private helicopter by immortal predators and flown to a Gothic fortress had nearly broken his mind, but the sight of his favorite patient snapping him back to reality. "Ms. Hayes," Harrison shouted, rushing to the bedside, completely ignoring the terrifying vampire king standing over her. "What is the situation?" "Her water broke," Dominic answered before Penelope could speak, his voice a low, vibrating hum of barely contained panic. "There is significant hemorrhaging. The contractions are less than 90 seconds apart. Her heart rate is 140. You will fix her, doctor, or you will not leave this room alive." Harrison didn't flinch at the death threat. He threw his briefcase onto a nearby tray, snapping on a pair of sterile latex gloves. "I don't care who or what you are, Mr. Ashford, but if you threaten me again while I am trying to save my patient, I will have your guards throw you out of my operating room. Now step aside and let me work." For a moment, the temperature in the room dropped 30 degrees. The guards behind Harrison tensed, waiting for the king to rip the mortal's head off for such insolence. But Dominic simply blinked, staring at the fiercely determined human doctor. Slowly, the vampire king took a single step back, giving the doctor access to his queen. "Dominic," Penelope whimpered, reaching her hand out blindly. "I am right here," Dominic promised, moving to the head of the bed and gripping her hand in both of his. He pressed his cold, soothing lips to her knuckles. "I am right here, Penelope. I will not leave. The baby is in extreme distress, Harrison announced, his hands moving rapidly over Penelope's swollen abdomen, his eyes glued to the portable ultrasound monitor his team had set up. The fetal heart rate is skyrocketing. Penelope, you are fully dilated, but the baby is presenting too fast. The sheer physical trauma of the delivery is causing massive internal bleeding. We have to get him out right now, or you will bleed to death on this table. Then cut him out, Dominic demanded. Do a cesarean. With this much blood loss, a surgical incision will kill her faster, Harrison snapped, turning to the nurses who had followed him in. Push 2 units of O-negative blood stat. Prepare the oxytocin. Penelope, look at me. Penelope forced her eyes open, her vision swimming with dark, encroaching spots. The pain was an ocean, and she was drowning in it. You are going to push, Harrison commanded, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. When the next contraction hits, I need you to push with everything you have. We are doing this right now. The next 20 minutes were a horrifying, beautiful blur of agony and desperate survival. Penelope's screams echoed against the ancient stone walls, raw and primal. She was a woman built for endurance, her lush body equipped with a deep natural strength. But giving birth to a half-vampire child was pushing her mortal limits to the breaking point. Dominic knelt by her head, murmuring ancient words of comfort in a forgotten language, his thumb stroking her damp cheek. He let her crush his hand, absorbing the immense pressure of her grip without a flinch. He could hear every terrifying biological change happening inside her body. He could hear the tearing of tissue, the frantic rushing of her fading heartbeat, and the chaotic booming drum of his unborn son fighting his way into the world. One more push, Penelope, Harrison yelled over the beeping alarms of the heart monitors. His medical scrubs were soaked in blood, his face pale with exertion. The head is clear. Give me one more. Penelope threw her head back, letting out a final earth-shattering cry as she bore down with the very last ounce of her strength. Suddenly, the pressure vanished. A sharp, piercing cry instantly filled the sterile medical ward. It was a beautiful, furious sound, a wail of absolute life and vitality. It's a boy, Harrison gasped, holding the tiny, writhing infant up. The baby was breathtaking. He was larger than a typical premature infant, his skin flushed and vibrant, covered in a thick head of raven black hair that perfectly matched his father's. He thrashed his little arms, his cries demanding the world's attention. Dominic's breath hitched. Tears, actual hot, impossible tears, spilled over his dark lashes and ran down his aristocratic face. He reached out with a trembling hand, barely brushing his fingertips against the baby's tiny, kicking foot. My son, Dominic whispered, his voice cracking with a profound, earth-shattering love. He looked down at Penelope, expecting to see her beautiful, exhausted face glowing with the same miraculous joy. But Penelope wasn't looking at the baby. Her eyes were rolled back, her lips blue. A deafening, continuous tone erupted from the heart monitor. Babe! She's crashing, Harrison screamed instantly, handing the wailing baby off to a terrified Sylvia, who cradled the infant to her chest. The doctor slammed his hands down on Penelope's chest, beginning brutal chest compressions. The hemorrhage is too severe. She's lost too much blood. Push the epinephrine. Come on, Penelope. Stay with me. Dominic froze. The world around him slowed to a crawl. The harsh fluorescent lights, the screaming alarms, the desperate shouts of the medical staff. It all faded into a dull, muffled roar. All he could see was the unnatural stillness of Penelope's chest. The woman who was his anchor, his warmth, his entire reason for enduring the centuries, was slipping away. Move! Dominic growled, his voice bypassing his vocal cords, entirely vibrating directly into the minds of everyone in the room. Harrison didn't stop the compressions. Mr. Ashford, I have to keep her heart beating. I said move, Dominic roared, backhanding the doctor away with just enough force to send him tumbling safely onto a nearby crash cart without breaking his bones. Dominic climbed onto the surgical bed, positioning himself directly over Penelope's fading body. Her heartbeat was a mere phantom flutter against his supernatural hearing. She had seconds left. There was no time for mortal medicine. There was only the ancient law of blood. I will not let you die, Dominic vowed, his eyes blazing with a terrifying crimson light. You are my queen. We share one life, or we share no life at all. He bit his own wrist. His elongated fangs pierced his pale skin, drawing a thick, dark ribbon of immortal blood. The blood of the Vampire King was the most potent, powerful, restorative substance on the planet, capable of healing fatal wounds and dragging a soul back from the very edge of the abyss. But to give it to a human to force it into their veins while they hovered on the brink of death was to initiate the ultimate, unbreakable mating bond. It would tie her life force directly to his for eternity. Dominic pried Penelope's cold lips apart and pressed his bleeding wrist to her mouth. "Drink, my love," he pleaded, his tears falling onto her pale cheeks. "Please, for our son, for me, come back to me." For a terrifying, endless moment, nothing happened. The blood simply pooled in her mouth. Dominic let out a guttural sob, his forehead resting against hers. He had found his miracle only to lose his heart, and then a reflex. Penelope's throat worked. She swallowed. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The king's blood hit her dying system like a lightning bolt. Penelope's eyes flew open, glowing with a brilliant temporary ring of gold. Her chest heaved as she sucked in a massive, ragged breath of air. The monitor beside the bed abruptly spiked, capturing the wild, powerful, renewed rhythm of her heart. The color rushed back into her skin, her lush cheeks flushing with a vital, supernatural heat. The bleeding stopped instantly, the torn tissues knitting themselves back together at an impossible, accelerated rate. Penelope blinked, staring up at the ceiling, her chest rising and falling heavily. She felt different. She felt a thrumming electric current humming beneath her skin, a profound, undeniable tether connecting her soul directly to the man hovering above her. She could feel his terror, his love, and his overwhelming relief echoing in her own mind. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, completely devoid of the weakness that had plagued her moments before. "I am here," he sobbed, collapsing against her shoulder, burying his face in her thick dark hair. He wrapped his arms around her lush, beautiful body, holding her as if he could physically shield her from death itself. "I am here, my love. I am so sorry. I had to bind us. I had to give you my blood to save you." Penelope slowly turned her head. She looked across the chaotic room. Sylvia was standing in the corner, tears streaming down her face, rocking a swaddled bundle of blankets. "My baby," Penelope demanded, sitting up with a strength that shocked even herself. Sylvia hurried forward, carefully placing the tiny, incredibly alert infant into Penelope's arms. The baby boy blinked up at his mother with a pair of stunning obsidian eyes completely identical to his father's. He let out a soft coo, reaching a tiny hand out to grasp Penelope's finger. Penelope pulled the baby to her chest, burying her face in the incredibly soft raven-black hair. The scent of him, milk magic and pure life, overwhelmed her senses. She looked at Dominic, who was watching them, with an expression of such pure, absolute reverence that it finally shattered the last remaining wall around her heart. He had not betrayed her. He had saved her. He had bound himself to her for eternity, ensuring that she would never fade, never wither, and never be separated from their child. "We need a name," Dominic whispered softly, reaching out to stroke the baby's cheek. Penelope leaned into his touch, her lush body leaning against his solid, immortal frame. The gilded cage was no longer a prison. It was a fortress, and she was its undisputed queen. "Leo," Penelope said softly, a tired but brilliant smile finally gracing her lips. "His name is Leo." The transition was not a delicate fading process. It was an explosive awakening. 3 weeks had passed since the traumatic, miraculous birth of Leo within the sterile, brightly lit confines of the West Wing Medical Sanctuary. Penelope Hayes was no longer just the terrified, fleeing mortal wife of the immortal sovereign. She was a mother, a queen, and fundamentally altered. The blood of the Vampire King, forcibly introduced into her failing human veins during her darkest hour, had not turned her into a creature of the night. She did not possess fangs. She did not burn in the sunlight, but she had irreparably changed. Her lush, plus-size body, which had always been a source of unyielding strength, now hummed with a dormant, terrifying electricity. Her senses were razor-sharp. She could hear the quiet, steady hum of the estate's massive generators 3 floors down. She could smell the crisp, metallic tang of the winter snow before it even began to fall over the vast Gothic grounds outside her window. Dominic had explained it during the quiet, intimate hours of the night. The blood bond had tethered tethered her life force directly to his. She was a human elevated to an apex predator's equal. Her injuries from the brutal childbirth had healed in mere hours. Her curves, her abundant softness remained beautifully intact, but beneath the surface, her muscles now held the tensile strength of steel wire. Sitting in the center of the master suite, Penelope gently rocked Leo. The baby boy was a marvel, growing at an astonishing rate. His obsidian eyes tracked her every movement, with an intelligence that was distinctly supernatural. He was nursing his tiny hands, gripping the soft flesh of her breast with astonishing power. "He is ravenous today," a deep velvet voice murmured from the doorway. Dominic stepped into the room, his presence immediately shifting the atmospheric pressure. He wore a tailored midnight blue suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and narrow waist. His crimson eyes softened the moment they landed on his wife and son. For 3 weeks, he had been a completely devoted, obsessive protector. He rarely left the suite, conducting all court business via Wyatt, his trusted head of security. "He is growing perfectly," Penelope replied, her voice steady, carrying a newly discovered resonance. She stroked Leo's thick raven hair. "Dr. Harrison Montgomery sent the latest blood panels from his secure lab in Manhattan. Leo's cellular regeneration is off the charts. He is healthy, Dominic. We both are." Dominic crossed the room and sank to his knees beside the plush nursing chair. He rested his chin on the armrest, completely captivated by the sight of his lush, magnificent wife nourishing their half-vampire child. He reached out, running a cool, reverent finger down Penelope's cheek. "You look breathtaking," Dominic whispered, his tone filled with absolute worship. "But I bring troubling news from the perimeter. Our isolation cannot last, my love. Word of Natasha's execution and Leo's birth has finally breached the estate's walls. The High Council of the Northern Covens has arrived." Penelope's hand stilled. The High Council, the governing body of the oldest, most ruthless vampires on the continent. They despise the human world, viewing mortals as livestock. The idea that a mortal woman, a fat, unapologetic mortal woman, was now the queen of the eastern seaboard, and the mother to the only natural-born heir in a millennium, was a direct threat to their entire political structure. "They want to see him," Penelope stated, her maternal instincts flaring into a protective, violent rage. The blood bond thrummed beneath her skin, reacting to her sudden anger. "They sent Lord Nathaniel." Dominic confirmed, his jaw setting into a rigid, dangerous line. "He is demanding an audience in the Great Hall. He claims he comes to assess the legitimacy of the child, but we both know the truth. They want to determine if Leo is a threat or a weapon they can control, and they want to test you." Penelope carefully detached Leo, settling the sleeping infant against her shoulder to burp him. She did not feel fear. 8 months ago, she had run from this world, terrified of its cruelty. 3 weeks ago, she had nearly been murdered by its treacherous jealousy. But now, fortified by Dominic's absolute loyalty and the ferocious love for her son, she felt nothing but a cold, calculating determination. "Then let us not keep Lord Nathaniel waiting," Penelope declared, standing up. "Sylvia is waiting in the nursery. She will watch Leo. Wyatt will guard the door, and I will show the High Council exactly who they are dealing with." Dominic smiled, a predatory, terrifying expression of pure pride. "What will you wear, my queen?" "The Alexander McQueen gown," Penelope decided, turning toward the massive walk-in closet. "The crimson one. I want them to know I am perfectly comfortable swimming in the color of their own blood." An hour later, Penelope stood before the towering mirror. The gown was a masterpiece of dark Gothic couture. It draped flawlessly over her heavy, magnificent curves, cinching at her waist before cascading to the floor in waves of blood-red silk. Her dark hair was pinned up in an intricate regal style, adorned with diamonds Dominic had gifted her. She was undeniably fat, undeniably human, and completely devastating. She was a goddess of life stepping into a mausoleum of the dead. The walk down the grand, sweeping staircase felt entirely different than it had 3 weeks prior. Then Penelope had been a captive, hauled up the stairs by a desperate king. Now she walked beside him, as his absolute equal. The heavy oak doors of the great hall, newly replaced after Dominic had obliterated them, stood closed. Wyatt stood guard, bowing deeply as they approached. "They are waiting inside, sire. Lord Nathaniel has brought an entourage of 20 heavily armed elite guards." "Let them have their toys," Dominic dismissed coldly. "Open the doors." The doors swung open, revealing the cavernous, opulent space. The hall was freezing, the temperature artificially dropped by the sheer concentration of ancient predatory energy gathered within. At the far end, standing insolently before Dominic's modern steel throne, was Lord Nathaniel. He was a tall, gaunt vampire with bone-white hair and eyes like shattered glass. Surrounding him were his elites clad in tactical gear, radiating a palpable, violent hostility. As Dominic and Penelope entered, the silence in the room became absolute. Every crimson gaze snapped to Penelope. They looked at her lush, full figure with a mixture of disgust, confusion, and deep, unsettling hunger. "King Dominic," Nathaniel drawled, his voice echoing like scraping metal. He offered a shallow, mocking bow. "We received your missive regarding the tragic execution of Lieutenant Natasha, a tremendous loss to the purity of our kind, and we hear rumors of an even greater tragedy, a half-breed." Dominic's presence expanded, filling the room with an oppressive, suffocating weight. "Watch your tongue, Nathaniel. You stand in the presence of your queen, and you speak of my heir. You will address her with respect, or I will remove your tongue from your skull." Nathaniel chuckled, an entirely humorless sound. He took a deliberate step forward, ignoring Dominic and focusing entirely on Penelope. "A mortal, a slow, heavy, fragile mortal. You expect the High Council to recognize this cattle as royalty? You expect us to bow to a woman who bleeds, who ages, who takes up so much space with her useless human fat?" Penelope felt the insult, but it did not cut her. It simply fueled the electric current humming in her veins. She stepped away from Dominic, moving toward Nathaniel. Her movements were graceful, completely devoid of the clumsiness Nathaniel expected. "I take up space because I am full of life, Nathaniel," Penelope said, her voice ringing out clear and authoritative, laced with the terrifying resonance of the blood bond. "Something your sterile, decaying council knows absolutely nothing about." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. He lunged forward, a blur of motion, intending to grab her throat and prove her fragility. He never made it. Penelope didn't flinch. She simply raised her hand and spoke a single word. "Kneel." The command did not come from her throat. It erupted from the ancient king's blood circulating through her heart. It was a command laced with absolute sovereign authority, a power Dominic had unknowingly transferred to her. The royal blood in her veins recognized Nathaniel as a subordinate, and it bent him to its will. Nathaniel hit the marble floor with a bone-shattering crack. His body completely seized his muscles, locking in absolute obedience to the queen's voice. He gasped, his shattered glass eyes wide with incomprehensible terror. Behind him, the 20 elite guards collapsed to their knees simultaneously, forced down by the invisible crushing weight of Penelope's command. Dominic stood frozen, staring at his wife in absolute awe. He had known the bond would heal her, but he had never imagined it would grant her the sovereign command. She possessed his authority. She possessed his power. "You come into my home," Penelope said coldly, standing over the paralyzed, trembling lord. She looked down at his gaunt, starved frame. "You insult my body. You threaten my son. You call me fragile. I survived a werewolf's poison in my husband's veins. I survived an assassination attempt by your prized lieutenant. I survived bringing a new, terrifying species into this world. Do not mistake my softness for weakness." She leaned down, her face inches from Nathaniel's terrified expression. "Return to your council. Tell them that the eastern seaboard is ruled by a king and a queen who share one life. Tell them that Leo Ashford is the heir to this throne. And tell them that if they ever send armed guards into my home again, I will not just force them to kneel, I will force them to walk into the sun." Penelope straightened her posture, smoothing the skirt of her crimson gown. She turned her back on the paralyzed vampires, completely dismissing them as irrelevant pests. She walked back to Dominic, who was watching her with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. "Release them," Dominic murmured, his voice thick with pride, offering his arm to her. "Get out," Penelope commanded over her shoulder. Instantly, the invisible weight lifted. Nathaniel and his elite guards scrambled to their feet, their aristocratic composure entirely shattered by the humiliating display of power. Without a single word of protest, without a single backward glance, the High Council's delegation fled the Great Hall, their terrifying speed fueled entirely by raw panic. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, leaving the hall in silence once more. Dominic pulled Penelope flush against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her lush, magnificent body, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled her scent, the intoxicating blend of apples, cinnamon, and the metallic hum of his own royal power. "You are magnificent," Dominic breathed against her skin, his fangs gently grazing her pulse point in a gesture of pure devotion. "You are the most terrifying, beautiful creature in this world. They will never challenge you again." Penelope wrapped her arms around his neck, finally letting the tension bleed out of her muscles. She was safe. Her son was safe. The world of vampires was ruthless, dark, and terrifying, but she had learned to master the shadows. She was the anchor to the most powerful creature on the continent, and she held a power of her own that none of them could ever comprehend. "Come," Penelope whispered, pressing a soft kiss to his cold jaw. "Sylvia will be getting anxious, and Leo is probably hungry again. Let's go back to our son." Dominic smiled, sweeping her up into his arms, utterly uncaring of the guards or the ruined state of the court. As he carried his brilliant plus-size, fiercely powerful queen back up the grand staircase toward the west wing, Penelope rested her head against his chest, listening to the phantom echo of his immortal devotion. She had walked into the Ashford estate expecting an end. She had found instead an absolute, unbreakable eternity. Penelope stepped into the Ashford estate expecting to sign a finalized divorce, but she found a destiny that reshaped the entire supernatural world. From a vulnerable, heartbroken mortal to the fiercely powerful queen of the eastern seaboard, her journey proves that true strength comes in every shape and size. With her newborn heir, Leo, and her devoted immortal king by her side, the Ashford legacy is now unbreakable. Did Penelope's ultimate mic drop moment give you chills? If you loved this intense, twist-filled vampire romance drama, please hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling supernatural tales.